Hi, good morning, Dimitri. I just need a couple of minutes. I'll wait till at least 8, and then we'll see. We can start talking. We'll see people will, I guess, trickle in.
Great, thank you. Good morning.
No worries. Okay, I'll mute for a couple of minutes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, this is Chandrakant.
Hi, Chandrakant. Just be with you in a minute. We'll wait a couple minutes. I see one of the speakers can't find the link to the Zoom, so we'll hang on and we'll see. We'll let people come in. Oh, Martin's on the call.
Hi, Jonathan. This is Chandrakant. I have called via phone. I might not be able to join from the Zoom due to some technical reasons.
Yeah, that's fine. What I said was I need to give the speaker, one of the speakers, a link. So I'll be with you in a minute.
Sure. Thank you. Bye.
Good morning, everybody. I posted, oh, Joe, good. I see you got on. Yeah, it
Good
looks
morning.
like that email, I wanted to paste in the link, but that's what happens when you send emails late at night. So sorry. So we still have some people coming in. It is 8:02. Why don't we go to the 8:05 and then I'll kick it off. In the meantime, I think you guys can see the, well, if I put the right thing up, the, this. I told Martin and Chandrakant, I'm sorry if I look like I'm a space alien or something like that, or maybe a bird, but I'm just getting used to these new glasses and their bifocals. So if I see you, I may have to have my head at 45 degrees. One more minute. Okay, let's kick this off. Welcome to everybody and those listening on the YouTube live stream. I posted the YouTube live stream on LinkedIn a few minutes ago, thinking that most of the people who are on the Zoom don't need the live stream because they're right here. But you can certainly send that around. So this is the second of our two meetings. It's our second meeting on model risk office hours. A big part of this is to help us put the best textbook together for model risk management and get a sense of what the field is doing, latest things. To that extent, the 203 number guy on the screen is Chandrakant Maheshwari. He's listed as 0.2 here. I'll get to that in a minute. And
Hi, everybody.
And Martin Goldberg, but it looks like Martin's having trouble getting to audio, so I think Martin said he couldn't make it. Anyway, the three of us are writing a book called, at the moment, Model Risk Management, a Practical Guide for Financial Engineers. So it's supposed to be the first textbook for financial engineering. And, you know, it'd be great if every financial engineering program taught this. I think that would save us a lot of time, especially when we see new consultants and new financial engineers working for us or with us. So that's the commercial, that's the promotion. I will give him a fuller introduction in a minute, but Joe Breeden has graciously decided to come on he's 2 hours behind in New Mexico, so he's up. If you think you're up early, he's really early. And it was fun. I figured out last night that he and I almost got our PhDs in the same program, but that didn't happen. So I can speak PhDs in physics, so that's kind of fun. And another Midwestern PhD like Alan Forrest, who went to Ohio State. Alan's on the line from Edinburgh. Satinder, I don't know as well. And Dimitri was on the last call, but certainly when it comes around, please introduce yourself if you're going to make a point.
Hi, Jonathan. Hi, I'm Satinder Jande. 7 investment banks, Morgan Stanley, the last one I'm known for my work around the trading book, FRTB. And then I became an executive selling mathematics back to banks with a company called NAG. And I'm also writing a book on delivering regulatory change. So it'd be interesting to get an author-to-author view on some of the aspects. I think I know Martin as well. So.
Yeah, right now he's like the Music Tommy on Broadway. We can't see him, we can't hear him. But yeah, and Satinder, and you said you're dialing in from London or from the UK, right?
Yeah, I'm from London. Yeah, I'm dialing in from here. So model risk keeps coming across my radar. I think it's a really important subject you're focusing on.
Great. And then just moving on through this I almost said curriculum, through the syllabus so if we can, I'd like to talk a little bit about loan modeling, of which I think Joe's been an expert and worked on for a while. We also had some questions about generative AI for the book, or LLMs. How much to say and how much, I guess you're sort of projecting, what would a junior FE have to deal with if they say, here's a Gen AI model we used to do loan modeling, we used to do something, anything. That's a semicolon. So these two things are not the same thing. It could be Gen AI of anything. So that might be a good thing to talk about. And then we could have a Q of A and a discussion. We are also open to suggestions of whom we might invite next time. Alan was gracious enough to come to our first meeting and be the guest there. So let me introduce Joe, so he can say a few things, I don't know, spontaneously or prepared. So it is true that he started his professional career by getting his PhD in physics, if I have it right, at the University of Illinois, and he received it in 1991. And I think you started in 87. So I started Berkeley in 84. Berkeley PhDs take a long time in physics because nobody wants to leave Berkeley. I guess that's the old joke. But I graduated in 90. And so it sounds like, and Illinois it came down to Illinois and Berkeley. And I spent some great times in Chicago. I know Illinois is a long way from Chicago, but I really like a lot of things. But ultimately, I went to Berkeley. But I have a lot of respect. There's a guy named Rodney King, might have been there around the same time. He's an old colleague of mine, but I don't know if you can remember back that far, if you're pre-Alzheimer's like I am. So if I have it right, his career began then a few years later after the PhD in a think tank created by Citibank. That was the Center for Adaptive Systems. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I haven't heard that name in a while.
But the focus, even in 95, I guess, was the mathematical analysis and engineering of loan portfolios, something very important to a Citibank. He's had an illustrious career since then. He currently is a co-founder of a company called Deep Future Analytics. I guess deep is used in a lot of different ways these days, like deep fakes. This is not a fake. This is a real company, Deep Future Analytics, and I think the primary clients are credit unions and community banks. And lastly, Joe is also the president of the Model Risk Management International Association, MERMIA, and he can certainly promote that as well. I've recently joined. Alan was the first one who told me about it, but it sounds like that's a pretty good resource. So, Joe, do you want to take a few minutes and just talk about yourself or topics that you think should be interesting to talk about? I'm going to stop the share too, so we can see each other.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. Happy to talk to you all today. Going back to that first think tank that Citibank had created, it was interesting because we were specifically not taught anything about lending. They just hired a bunch of physicists in the area here, Santa Fe and Los Alamos, and gave us assignments and said, figure it out, because if we show you how to do what we do, then you'll just tell us more of what we already know. So my first assignments were South America in 95, 96, and Southeast Asia 97, 98. Specifically, they were sending me to places in crisis course, the idea of creating a model to help someone manage a crisis during a crisis is never the best plan. A little bit late, but it was great educationally. And in South America, I was tasked with create stress test models, time series models for Argentina to help them figure out where their economy was going, where their loan portfolio was going specifically. That's when I realized that there was a lot more going on than just some economic factors. I could not fit their portfolio performance just from employment, GDP, and the usual mix. And when I was assigned to work in Southeast Asia in '97, that was more illuminating because when I called up, I still recall head of data for the region was in Singapore. Name was Suresh Vadinathan. And when I asked for data for their portfolios for the region, he said, well, would you like vintages with that? Like asking if I want fries with my burger or something. It seemed kind of an odd way to ask me this. And I was like, well, I don't know, what's a vintage? Oh, well, that's the term we use for, cohort, group of accounts that all book in the same month. And then we track their performance over time. So you make this vintage graph that compares the performance of these different cohorts. And as he was talking, if you will, the math just kind of fell out because Citibank at the time, as far as I know, all the other banks were just doing these graphs. And they were doing these graphs in order to visualize structure and then make guesses about what happened. But I guess coming from a physics background, that every problem we solve starts with a graph, and if you make the right graph, you can figure out the math and solve the problem. And so just hearing about how they looked at this, it's like I could see this solved the problems I was having in Argentina, and it just meant that I needed some math behind this. So with a few months of work in Excel, I was able to cobble together my first version of what I now know as age period cohort models. And so, as usual, good ideas get reinvented many times. What I thought was my good idea of how to put math behind vintage modeling turned out to be a reinvention of what a German psychology professor invented around 1898. So they've been around a while. But they hadn't been used in lending or for, I don't know why, but that has led me on this path because that key issue was when you're looking at a loan to be able to separate the key drivers. And by key drivers, I don't mean unemployment and credit bureau scores. I'm talking about different dimensions of the problem. From a loan perspective, there is a life cycle, a pattern over time of when losses will come, that they don't all come in the first month or the last month. They're spread, but they're spread in a characteristic way that is very predictable when you look at a certain demographic group in a certain country with a certain product. So once you've measured that, turns out to be very stable. The life cycle for US mortgage hasn't changed in 30 years. I know this because I've been comparing the data this way that whole time. What does change around that life cycle are two other things. The environment, obviously, and by environment, I mean partly the economy, but not only the economy. Because there are forbearance programs, skip-a-pay programs, seasonality, all these things are relative to calendar date, and they impact performance. And you can think of this as a layer being added on top of that life cycle. And in fact, in units of log odds of default or log odds of prepayment, they are literally additive. So we have this life cycle plus an environment. And then the third piece is that credit risk measure. I haven't mentioned the borrower yet. And in an age period cohort model, we think about borrowers in aggregate by vintage, and you ask about whether one pool is higher risk than another pool. But if you put this more in a survival modeling context, hazard model and life cycle, more or less the same thing. But I can have borrower attributes and environmental attributes in addition to this. So really, I'm always thinking about 3 dimensions, things that are a function of age of the loan, things that are a function of calendar date, which is going to be that outside environment, and things that are a function of the borrower or the origination date for the pool. So this framework of splitting things into 3 dimensions and then finding ways to explain the dynamics in each of those 3 dimensions was a lucky accident for me, because it turns out to be a very good mathematical way to explain what's happening in a portfolio. And a lot of the work I've done since then is, well, if you can split these things this way, then I can create a different kind of credit score, a panel-based kind of score, if I'm bringing in the account attributes, or I can do stress testing or volatility analysis if I do certain analysis on the environment. And all of this can be done in a competing risk framework. So you've got prepayment, charge-off, that sort of thing. So in a nutshell, that's what I've worked with from a modeling perspective. And it turns out that the same paradigm works just fine with machine learning methods, whether it's stochastic gradient boosted trees or neural nets, with the SGBoost type algorithm. If it's a regression tree, you can give it fixed inputs. I can say, from my age period cohort model, here's the life cycle, here's the economic impacts. Now let's use SGBoost to solve for the consumer behavior in the fanciest machine learning method you want. And in a neural network framework, you have to do a little bit of coding, but if you take something like Keras, and on the one hand, you've got a couple of nodes bringing your inputs of life cycle and environment, and you take them straight to the output node, and the rest of the neural net looks like any other neural net. So, whoever your favorite author is about neural nets in credit risk, you can take that algorithm, turn it into a panel score, and bring lifecycle environment as fixed inputs, and it works just fine. And the reason I start by talking about models is that I know we want to talk about model risk management, and designing your models to not fail is a nice way to do model risk management. And so the reason I kind of finish here with machine learning is that we all know that machine learning models are prone to overfitting, and their performance tends to degrade very rapidly out of sample, out of time, especially. Well, it turns out if you build them this way, they don't degrade any faster than any other model. And in fact, if you take your traditional logistic regression credit score and turn it into a panel model with these fixed inputs, they are much more robust. And so we've been playing with machine learning models that don't degrade for years, which is not the usual story you hear from people about machine learning. I believe, in running a lot of diagnostics on this, that it comes down to, if you're trying to build a model, any kind of model, with only a few years of performance data because you think you're focused on the consumer lives in this environment. And in fact, you get a lot of spurious correlations to things that really happen to be trends in consumer attributes, which in fact should be cyclical trends in the economy. And if you don't separate those effects, then your model is trying to explain everything by the consumer, and you get the wrong trends. And what happens out of sample is you've tied yourself to a trend that breaks, and your model isn't performing well anymore. So it's really about explaining these trends appropriately, finding the right causes. So that's my bit as far as how this ties into model risk management. So I'll call that an introduction, long-winded. I'll take a breath here, but
That's great.
Happy to talk.
Thanks. Yeah. So one way of thinking about this is that this is nourishing us and teaching us. But another thing is, like, have you met or have you thought about, like, you meet a junior person and it's their first time working on this model at a community bank. What sort of things, as far as concepts, I think I can repeat back some of them, obviously understanding what a credit score is, understanding logistic regression, and in particular, understanding odds and what that really means. So those are certainly two very important founding things. On some of the other ones, I guess I don't know enough about machine learning. You're talking about boosting and things. I've heard about it. I have a vague idea. But like of the things that you just mentioned, what do you think are the core concepts that a junior person either would understand or can understand quickly, and then immediately could see if there's a red flag as far as that?
Well, it has been my experience that the age period cohort framework, or really just explaining performance as this addition of three different dimensions in log odds, that's usually not that hard to teach. Now, I usually have to repeat myself a few times in the course of in a training course, because it's not what they have been taught. This is not a standard stats course type of approach, but it is intuitive, and it's easy enough to prove that it's not just about lending. Anytime you've got an interaction between a consumer and a product, anytime you've got multiple starting events that you can model, you're going to find this breakdown. It's kind of a measure of the world we live in. Even if you focus on lending, it's not all about loan origination. Yesterday, I was building models this weekend on recoveries. And, there the charge-off date is the vintage date, and you're looking at pools of charged-off accounts, trying to figure out what's the life cycle for those recoveries, what's the environmental impact, and how did different charge-off groups perform differently, because a group that charged off in a recession, ironically, you tend to recover better on them after the recession's over because they never really wanted to charge off in the first place. The group that charged off in a good economy, well, why couldn't you get a job now? They're harder to collect on because of whatever reasons they failed in the first place, were more entrenched. So these things have broad application, and they do require developing a certain intuition on the problem, but it's a very intuitive way once you walk into it, I think.
Joe, can I ask a question? How do you find it explaining to a student I suppose, the redundancy of the three measures of time? From any two of the measures of time, cohort and period, say you can deduce the third. So there's overspecification in the model structure that you have. How do you get a student comfortable with that?
Well, I've never had a student like you, Alan, who actually would think through to that point. So I usually have to bring it up to them. And your point is that the dimensions I have here are age of the account, calendar date, and vintage origination date, age, cohort, age, period, cohort. And I usually think about them as age, vintage, calendar date. Anyway, the point is that you can compute the age of an account by taking date minus origination date, date minus vintage. That's a linear calculation. And it means that there is a linear specification error in the functions that I would want to estimate. So what it means is that there are three dimensions to my problem, but mathematically I can only solve linear trends in two out of the three dimensions, or spread across the three dimensions. I can't constrain all three. Now, this is not a feature of the model, it's a feature of the data. That any statistical technique you apply to this data will have the same problem. The question is, what do you do with it? If I take logistic regression, you'd say, hey, I'm using bureau data and some economic factors, and I can even put in dummies for the life cycle, and I don't get a specification error. The model solves just fine. The model solves fine, but it's unstable. If you, in an age period cohort approach, everything is non-parametric functions, and there you've got an explicit specification error you have to resolve. In a model that's based on everything is an input factor, you don't get an explicit specification error. What you get is instability in estimating your coefficients. And I published a paper with Tony Bellotti and Jeannie Leonova, where we looked specifically at Cox pH models. And we showed that in the context of lending, if you use Cox pH models with our data from 3 dimensions, they're unstable. And the problem is with those is that they don't have the control knobs to make them stable. You can't put in any assumptions. So unfortunately, they're not really reliable in our industry. They're great in 2 dimensions, not in 3. So what this gets to, real answer to your question, Alan, is that you have to make an assumption in order to get rid of that specification error. My assumption, if I have enough history, is to say, well, the economy should not have a long-term trend. It's equivalent to saying that a through-the-cycle PD exists. If a through-the-cycle PD exists, if you can actually compute an average, then there can't be a long-term secular trend. Ergo, I can set that to 0 and solve. Now, if my data set is short, this is not true. Any 2, 3, 4 year chunk of our history will have a trend, because that's not enough to see what the long-term 0 is. And then I have to make some other decisions. I have to look at, maybe I do want to bring in some economic data and introduce a secular term and use that to normalize the trend. Or maybe I can assume that there's no net trend in the origination quality. Or maybe I can borrow a life cycle from a shared data pool like what my company runs, because there I know it was based on many years of data, and that locks in a trend and the rest solves itself. So lots of ways to do it, but yeah, you have to think it through. And it makes it sound like these models are a lot of work, but if you don't think it through, then you're just hoping to be lucky. And sometimes you get lucky, but yeah, that's the long answer.
Okay, that's great, Joe. So it's not to distract things, Jonathan. In fact, you know, the assumptions and the structure of the model are in some senses a microcosm of model risk. The specification decisions, the assumptions that
Right.
Joe has to put in are a really, really interesting part of this development.
No, absolutely. I've seen that with junior people. I think we talked about this, that someone was trying to relate CVA to PFE, not realizing that they're 2 different measures. So, you know, this would be assumptions. If you don't have those assumptions up front and know them, I think that's frequently what a junior person doesn't have in their toolkit, or they haven't observed. You know, we've been working on this for a while. The most basic thing, the building block, is what are the assumptions, then what's the methodology, and the specifics, as Joe said. So that's well done.
So I can wrap the discussion on age period cohort models by saying that they do provide a natural framework that even if you're going to the account level, you're making your forecast month by month, and you're doing it with economic scenarios. And that month by month approach, competing risk approach, makes it very natural for cash flow modeling, because a standard cross-sectional bureau score doesn't give you cash flows. It's not a natural lead to computing yield. You have to do a lot of approximation to get from a bureau score, which is a static number, through to a chain of expected payments and losses, which will lead to computing a yield. Whereas if you do a panel model with this APC structure, the cash flows are there from the beginning. So since people are promoting their books, I've got to tell you that within a couple of months, I'll have a book come out on how to do exactly this. It's a short read, and it's, in fact, it's a decent fit to an audio book because there's very little math in it. It's just conceptually, how do you set these things up? And I was working on this yesterday. It's called Redesigning Credit Risk Modeling to Achieve Profit and Volatility Targets. So if you have an interest, it's that intuitive introduction to how this works.
That's great. Thanks. Any questions on that, Dimitri? Yeah.
Yes, well, first of all, yeah, thank you very much for very informative presentation, and I'm looking forward to actually reading your book. And I have a question which kind of has two related parts. So one of the reasons why so many people kind of without thinking use just like bunch of logistic regressions is that it makes two things easy from model risk management standpoint. One is explainability, and another one is ongoing performance management, monitoring, ongoing performance monitoring, OPM. Yeah, and I was just wondering if you could say a few words, for basically a master student, how would you do those things with a panel model? Thank you so much.
Thank you. In fact, we often call things models that are not necessarily models. Like logistic regression is an estimation technique. And if you look at how I'm doing age period cohort models, and really everything I'm doing is a panel logistic regression. Instead of having one observation per account, I'm laying out an observation each month for each account. Now you can look up the survival literature to understand censoring and a lot of the issues that come with how to set up that data. But once you've laid out your structure, the coefficients you want to estimate, it's logistic regression. And that log odds framework that makes these pieces additive, even that is an assumption. Logistic regression is an assumption, but when we use it on our data, we find it works. 99% of the structure is explained. So it's, yeah, so this is not an either or, it's a structured way to use logistic regression. And when I talk about, Alan, the point you raised about specification errors, that means I have to put in a constraint. So it's a panel logistic regression with a certain structure and a constraint. And it doesn't have to be actually anything fancy when you lay it out that way. It looks more or less like what you've always done.
Thank you so much.
Let me move to, are there other questions on what Joe said? Or perhaps they'll come along. I wanted to, while you were talking, I guess Sven Weidner came on from London Stock Exchange Group, and I wanted to just give him the floor for a minute. You say that, Sven, that one of your interests is model governance, trying to tie that to the rest of the discussion. So we did certainly model governance in any models that provided, but also in the sense of machine learning, are people using, I'd be interested to know if people are using machine learning or AI to sort of enforce policies and procedures, because I hear that some banks are doing that and some exchanges as well. So why don't you take the floor?
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, as Jonathan said, my name is Sven. I am a co-head of model governance at London Stock Exchange, and my interest is model governance, so I'm finalizing my doctorate in that. To come to the question, regulations is changing. In the UK, we've got the SS 123 that have just gone live in May, where the focus has shifted a little bit in terms of model governance. So my interest is in model governance and looking at that. Tying it up with AI, we have developed an AI risk framework, and the components of it, it's being done across the board. However, I haven't come across that we are using that the model risk team is using AI to invest. So that's what I'm open to hear other experiences or anything related to that where they've used AI within the model risk management team.
Right.
Back to you. Thank you, Jonathan.
Sure. I think some of the audio cut off, but it sounds like machine learning is something that you'd be interested, or that may be being developed in model governance, but it's not used in a widespread way.
Absolutely spot on. Yes.
Okay.
However, just to add to that,
Yep.
we are, as a group, deriving AI model risk framework, how to look at the AI models that are coming into the firm, and getting some sort of approval and governance over the AI and the AI systems that are coming into this to the firm.
Yeah, so maybe one way of relating that to loans, corporate loans at least, is like my last employer, Jeffries, had something like 30 different spreadsheets, one for each sector, to do internal ratings. And those are horrible. And people had copied and pasted them, and now you have 30 sort of things, each of which is a little bit different from the mean. So it's impossible to do governance on that. And just registering them and giving them a number in the database is obviously not really controlling them. So I wondered whether, on some of these things, first of all, I don't know how many people use spreadsheets. The fact that they used it for internal ratings is trying to tie back to the idea of loans and credit ratings, of course. And second, what sort of models, I'll ask the group, do you think that AI could test well? I certainly imagine it could test the Black-Scholes model, or sort of, test the inputs. What are we going the way of? So this is sort of consuming AI instead of sort of using it to produce new things. I guess that's what I'm saying. So I don't know, any comments on that? Have you seen that?
So from my perspective, Jonathan, I haven't seen it, I haven't come across it that is actually used within the model risk management team. However, I would love to hear the ideas.
Jonathan, in Canada, you mentioned CVA, credit value adjustments, earlier.
Right.
There's Ryan Ferguson, Riskfield. They're using neural net type networks for CVA pricing as an alternative to more traditional methods. My company, where I was an executive, we sold algorithmic differentiation,
Right.
AAD, as another method. That's not doing it in a machine learning way.
Yeah, I mean, personally, the issues that we had with CVA was it was always a huge Monte Carlo, and we were using numerics for some other things. I guess we were using Murex, and they would never really tell us the secret sauce on the Monte Carlo. So we didn't even know, what do we expect if we increase the number of trials? Should it go like root n? Should it go like n to something less than 1/2? Should it go like n to the -1, and so on? And should we be doubling? Are we using, sort of the types of random numbers like Sobel sequences where you should be doing 2 to the n iterations, or should you, and so on and so forth. So I think something that doesn't use simulation would be a good thing to look at for CVA for sure.
Yeah, can I just add to that? Last week, I was invited to the Economist Commercializing Quantum Computing event in London, 2 days, where we had Quantinuum and other quantum companies. I'm a physicist as well, by the way, so I get the quantum bit. And I was looking around for use cases around trading, and it came to 2 things that excited me there. One was a company generating real as good as random numbers as you're going to get to feed a Monte Carlo. I got excited by that. Maybe I shouldn't. But the other application was around speeding up Monte Carlos and around autocallable options, for example, anywhere where there's complicated instruments that needed to be done. Those were the 2 notable cases that jumped out. Pharmaceuticals was the other area that it seemed to benefit.
Yeah, what I ended up doing with PFE when I was at Jeffries was doing it instead of just like increasing the number of iterations. I thought about the seeds as like a different dimension. So let's say if you have the seeds are the columns of a matrix and the iterations are the rows. And I thought about that like being a physicist, like measuring the period of pendulum in freshman physics. You're not just going to do it one time. So I would rather look at let's say the internal spread. We talk a lot about variance reduction, but the spread in the individual seeds. And are you going to tell the regulator that every time you run the model, you're going to use the number 7 as a seed? No. I mean, so there's sort of a deviation, or there's a variance among the seeds. So that was something that, even with 10 seeds, you can get that down a lot. So that'll be in the book.
Actually, there's a related point in lending that I found fascinating recently. That if you start, we're used to linear models on the lending side, the logistic regression approach, and the uncertainty in every forecast is not a constant, but it kind of smoothly varies. You've got your classic scatter plot with a line through it, and if you look at the uncertainty, it's got this little shape it goes through. And because that is so predictable and so smoothly varying, I have yet to meet anyone who uses uncertainty in their underwriting. It's kind of implicitly assumed that all my scores have the same confidence interval. Well, if you switch to machine learning, that is absolutely not true. The whole point of machine learning is, my mental image of machine learning is pockets of predictability. To have a model that is sufficiently nonlinear that it can figure out that under these special conditions, this little pocket, I have a really good idea what's going to happen. But over here, it's all kind of vague and I'm not so certain. And so it's going to find all the good pockets and leave the rest on kind of this vague background. And that means that your forecast point by point can be really good or really bad. And if you don't know that when you go to actually originate a loan, then it's almost as bad as having no forecast. So I strongly believe that loan origination has to move to being more than one dimensional. It's what is your score or your forecast, however you want to say that, and what's the uncertainty in that? Because if I have high uncertainty in what I know about you, I have no business offering you a loan. And we have to translate that to terms that can be explained to the prospective borrower. I can't deny them just based on my model uncertainty. I have to say insufficient information or something that's a valid response. But this kind of gets back to our model risk management, where we quantify accuracy of forecasts. We're supposed to know all this stuff, but it's not being used when we use the model. It's not being carried through to the origination. It's being used as a validation process to decide if the model is usable. But in fact, these model risk management issues need to be part of the origination. The model can't be used if you don't know its accuracy for each of these forecasts. So it opens the door to model risk management is not just back office, offline model risk management. It's at point of origination. I need to know what's going on. So it becomes transactional model risk management.
Yeah, absolutely. I would take that a bit. I was going to say, you might tell a junior person or business person about error bars, and they'll assume you're talking about a tavern or pub down the street, right? But
Well,
yeah,
I mean, there is a channel for such second dimension information, Joe. It should be through the capital that's allocated there, in the sense that the variance or the error bar should be setting or putting a conservatism level into the calculation of capital, so that when it comes to the origination of loans under such circumstances, the ones that are least certain should have that greater capital add-on, be less attractive to the lender. That's the ideal circumstance. I think you're right, it doesn't happen so strongly in practice, but that's a really good way to inject model risk into the origination process.
well, it's also for Dimitri, I think, mentioned ongoing monitoring before. If you see that the accuracy is degrading over time, then that's like when you drive your car or bicycle, whatever, and you can tell whether it's degrading in a secular way.
Yep.
In fact,
Actually,
I like.
my comment. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to respond to Alan that, in fact, I like turning this forecast accuracy into a cost of funds, a capital charge. And so at point of origination, I'm not using a score, I'm using expected profitability.
Yep.
And just go ahead and deduct it right there.
Worst case. Yeah. Go ahead, Dimitri.
Sorry, apologies. So one point I wanted to add is that, well, we were talking about using various AI techniques in model risk management. So one trend that we're seeing a lot is using, some version of some generative AI. You look at a new model and you try to figure out, what is the plan for validating this model and what is the plan for ongoing performance monitoring. That's as people sort of try to do quite a lot these days with very degree of success. And one of the inputs into that is basically which regulators are going to look at it, because we know that different regulators have very different approaches to what's required. So if you have a situation like was mentioned earlier, you have a vendor model. The vendor is not as open as some other vendors about what's going on inside, and you have a Monte Carlo. Then this AI process is probably going to say that you need to kind of check what will happen if you run this Monte Carlo a few times with different seed and see if you get square root of n.
Yeah.
Or some other thing. Not only when you revalidate this model maybe once in 3 years, but as part of a more frequent ongoing monitoring. I mean, ideally daily, but that's too much. But because if it starts deteriorating, you want to catch it not during the next validation, but much sooner. That's what OPM is for. And that's where generative AI actually is helpful in saying this is how you can improve your OPM plan, for example, or your validation plan. Sorry, that's it.
Right. Sven, back to you. Do you think that I guess I've seen some articles in Basel about the way that AI is used by banks and maybe some of the U.S. regulators. Are there some that are looking at it more carefully than others in your experience? I mean, or just talk about the UK if you want, PRA, Bank of England, and so on.
I don't know if you are aware, the EU has issued the EU AI Act. So that is actually the first AI Act that's really come into place in terms of a regulator putting it into place. And with the AI Act has come also sort of how you should approach the AI models in a certain way. It is still being implemented. So the EU acts normally have 2 years in the turnaround. So for the worst case models, you've got 2 years. The models that do harm to individuals and all those things that the pharmaceuticals are using have to comply within the first 6 months of the EU AI Act that's been implemented. So I think the regulators are driving this bus a little bit for us by actually putting it into regulations. So I've spoken about SS,
Right.
123 that's come into the UK. They had a portion on AI, specifically focusing on AI, which is interesting. Where normally you will have just pure focus of model risk. But now what is happening within the model risk space is that when you do regulation horizon scanning, you can't just look at direct model regulation. You have to look at direct model regulation and indirect. So that's, it doesn't say model risk on the tin in terms of the regulation. However, the EU AI Act has a big implication on models and model risk management. So therefore, the sort of the view has to widen quite a lot in terms of what we've done up to now and how we're going to look at it, I think, in the future.
Yeah, that's well said.
I'm not sure whether I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No, that's
I'm
very
not sure
helpful.
whether I'm asking your question,
That's great.
but I'm just trying to sort of put it out there that the world is changing a little bit as to how we look at model risk management and how we've been applying it.
Yeah, I've been looking at SS123 a little bit lately. In fact, we talked a little bit about it at the previous meeting, and the obvious thing for me is to compare it to other ones, such as the Fed's SR11.7 guidance. Right, exactly. And so, but I'll look more carefully at the AI discussion. That'll be my homework.
So the big question I have in my mind, certain sort of regions have started putting AI models underneath the model risk management framework, and certain regions where, specific the Asia region, don't think the AI models should be incorporated underneath model risk management. So there's a movement, I think in America and Europe, towards incorporating AI models within model risk management. However, in Asia, it's counterproductive. So only time will tell us which way we're going with AI models, whether it's going to be part and parcel of model risk management going forward, or whether it's going to become a separate type of risk that needs to be looked at.
Other comment?
Sven,
We're coming up
Sven,
to
lem-
the
sorry.
top or bottom of the hour, depending on where you are. We've got about 8 minutes left.
Sorry, I was just going to quickly pick up Sven on that last point, which is quite an interesting point. You and I were on a roundtable on this recently in London, and one of the aspects was the accountable executive, where it's pretty clear that you need a board level, like or a chief risk officer or somebody accountable, and that is an indication from the regulator about the level of attention this deserves, and to have that there. I'm talking about SMF4, senior manager.
Absolutely.
Regime. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it comes back to my first point where I'm trying to make is where model risk management is going to move a little bit away from pure model validation and start focusing on model governance, where this regulation, which is the latest model regulation that's come into place, is focusing on model governance, and it is elevating model risk management right into the board. So the board has to ratify the model risk policy, just as one incident, as example. The second one is you have to have an independent or individual responsible for model risk management. Now, in practice, that's easy. You just give the CRO another cap. However, it is those things that are being brought in, so that the regulators are forcing model risk management to the board, where past, I think model risk management was just reported to the board, and they would take cognizance of what is happening and also what the most senior oversight committee is doing in terms of model risk management. However, and this is the point I'm trying to make, the regulations is forcing it right into the board and at board level. And the third point in terms of model governance that is new, I know that a lot of banks and firms, they do obviously the model risk reporting. The regulation states that it needs to be at board level discussions. In other words, you can't just send your KRIs to the board and they acknowledge it. It needs to be a discussion now at this point. And that's what the regulators is requiring, the UK taking the lead on it. My take on it is that as any other regulations, other regulators will follow to a certain extent. So I think that's on the card for model risk management.
Yeah, Sven, at least for me, that the audio broke up a little bit. Did everybody understand what he's? I got, I think everything that you said.
Yeah.
Other comments?
I can completely agree with Sven's overview there. I'm thinking when it cascades down in regard to AI, generative AI, the large language model areas, we're really short of technique, how to validate them. We don't, what are the metrics? What are the tests? I think technical teams are going to be at a loss how to put into effect a validation framework as rigorous as, say, for logistic regressions and scorecards and CVAs and so on. So it's going to rest on the control environment at first. It's going to be about the humans in the loop, and that fits with the EU AI law quite well. It's a very much about control environment and about recovery processes.
Yeah, and I'm still
absolutely,
back
Alan. I can.
Sorry.
Alan, I absolutely agree with you. Now, the setup of the model risk management team is going to become different because there's a different skill set that's going to be needed for AI, machine learning, and large language models. Traditional guy that's come from credit risk and did the credit risk analysis and then become a model validator. There's not a lot of skills out there, in terms of AI validation. So I think that will need to take a little bit of thinking as to how the financial services firms are approaching it, because it doesn't mean the traditional model risk career up to now is going to be adequate for the AI flood that I think is coming. Over to you, Jonathan. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Just somebody asked me a question on text about this meeting. I'll just say recording it, so we are recording the meetings, but we're doing them, but the reason you don't get a pop-up asking you if you want to be recorded is because they go right to the live stream on YouTube, and then those are archived. So this all, so next time, brush your hair before you come on to the meeting. Yeah, so we just have a few minutes left. Also, suggestions for future speakers. I know you said Ryan Ferguson is someone who works on neural nets, so that was one name that came up. Or you can email me or message me on LinkedIn afterwards. I did try to get Mark Green to the first meeting. I think sounds like he may have busy London mornings, but I'll reach out to him separately. But other suggestions for that would be good. So let me know if there are no more comments, or if you want some time back to get a cup of tea or coffee, that's fine too.
Yeah, that's good. And all of these learnings are going into your book, are there? These discussions that we're having.
The thing that we definitely are doing, at least Martin and I, is we're looking back at the screeds, the rants that we put on. Well, hopefully the analysis that we put on LinkedIn, and try to capture some of those. Like I did put up this thing of the two-dimensional, what Dimitri said, with looking in seed space and number of iteration space, and predicted R squared is another big thing of mine that I'd like to capitalize on. So here and there, it's still got to be finished. It's got to be given to them, I think, by May of 2025. So we're not writing the Torah and the Mishnah and the Talmud and the Quran and everything else at once. So.
Yeah, one point I would make, my book equally I could have made around internal model standardized approach and quite mathematical. But what I wanted to do was have the reader critically think about, is this a good formula? Is it good for the problem I'm trying to solve? And why is the regulator using this? So really get them to get under the skin of, as you said, in terms of religious text, there's the text and there's a spirit of what that text is trying to tell you. Using the religious example, it's a good place to finish, actually.
Yeah, I guess I'm still left with the impression that, sometimes you probably have this experience too. You order something from Amazon or another online place, and it comes in a box with no instructions. And I sort of feel like that's how a junior FE is going to encounter models, particularly these AI models and things like that. And even if they've been taught logistic regression, someone still can't tell me what's the first thing that you should do, where I think I could, if someone gave me a Black-Scholes model, I know what I would do. I'd put in negative volatility. I do a bunch of things to try to break it. So
I think what you're talking about is the disconnect between and I don't know how much of it is a disconnect of practitioners teaching in academia, but that's another topic. So when you hit the front line of a trading desk, or or even in risk,
That's right. Yeah, I've stopped and started trying to do something called financial engineering in practice, and to teach that. Got a lot of people interested in it. I was going to do it on a Udemy or a Coursera platform. Then I found out they only pay you like $30 a course every time a course runs. So it's like, I don't know. That doesn't even cover my internet connect charges.
I have a little comment to firm, if you don't mind. So SR 11.7 was kind of based historically on a whole bunch of papers from Los Alamos on how to test models that predicted what nuclear tests would do, which were developed after they banned actual physical nuclear testing, right? And this, and it has all sorts of things that need to be a part of model documentation, right? So if you check all the boxes, it's going to be a pretty big document. And it's interesting that it doesn't require a user guide.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't say, well, in part of the model documentation, there should be a part which says, if you don't read the whole things, here are the pieces that you absolutely need to read in order to understand how to use this model.
No, that's absolutely true. I think the two main documents I'm acquainted with is the model developer's perspective and the model testers or validator's perspective. But the actual model user, well, not much is said about the model user, the role of it. You just assume that it's like when you get on an airplane, you assume that they tighten the wing nuts and stuff like that. You're not going to get into the weeds. You assume if you sit it down on an airplane, a dining room table chair, it's not going to fall apart. But,
Yeah. But the interesting thing is that folks who enforce SR 11.7 kind of decided collectively as a regulatory community that yes, this is something that should have been there. Conversely, there are big chunks of SR 11.7 that people have decided, we're just not going to do them, and it's pretty common to just because there's stuff there which is really not applicable to financial institutions, which is more like for nuclear tests. And I wonder what people think about this new European, EU and UK regulation. How different do you think the actual usage, kind of the case law, going to be versus what we kind of read right now in a document?
Well, I mean, we are doing that in the table where I look at EU, SR 11.7, the major UK documents. People said to look at Japan, I have not yet, and Canada, and even UAE. So at least to compare the countries. I agree, going back to the Bible, we don't take everything in the Bible literally, right? But we do see how it affects Western culture and in other texts, Eastern texts as well. So I think you want to get the gist of it. Well, we ran over a little bit, yeah. Maybe one last comment, yeah.
Yeah, Dimitri, it comes to two things, and telling you stuff already here. It's principle-based, it's rules-based, and depending on which jurisdiction you're in.
Right.
And that's yeah. I'll finish it in given time.
No, we have that too in the spreadsheet. It's some of the things are principles and some of the things are rules, definitions. There's different ways to slice the document to try to but then the main thing is just to intercompare across jurisdictions. If you're a global bank or working for one, I think that would be the most useful.
Yeah, if I may, I'd just like to sort of conclude with this comment. If you see scenarios and scenario analysis, and a lot of banks are being put through that at the moment, and I was the chairman of scenario stress testing conference last year. The storytelling aspect, and Sven, this comes to the difference, I suppose, between SR 11.7, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, and the SS 123. It's a more qualitative as well as quantitative aspect. So the storytelling side is as important, hence the board level accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very good point. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, someone mentioned explainability.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I think you need to go about your days, afternoons, evenings. So let's please come back and tell your friends, and we'll meet in 1 week on the 18th.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, everyone. This was very
Thank you.
informative.
Thanks. We'll see you online. Yeah. Bye-bye.